So, Alex,
So,
what's
Chris,
new?
I was just fascinated by, or the thinking about the fact that we both came here through music videos. Was that my accidental reason that I'm here at all is because I was an artist at film school when punk started in '75, and it just was the right place to be for music, and total accident. But that Iggy Pop asked me to make a music video, and I didn't know what it was, but said sure, let's do this thing, and turned into the thing that brought me to the US.
That was pre-MTV that you started, right?
Yeah, I think so, just about. I think we were. It was 1980. I'd been doing record sleeves since 76, 77. And working on the Soldier campaign with Iggy, and then it turned into the Cure and the Banshees and various other, and then here it turned into like Michael Jackson and
Which Michael
eventually
Jackson?
the one in Egypt.
Oh, yeah. Was that Fincher?
It wasn't. No, Fincher did a lot of like Paula Abdul and Madonna, 3 Madonna videos. Oh Father.
So maybe we should give your history and my history, because that's what they asked us to do.
Yes,
backstage.
go. Okay, where did you start?
No, continue.
All right, so music videos led to commercials, working at propaganda with Fincher, commercials, and then that started connecting all of us to the first, or to that next wave of directors who started making movies. And so I did Lawnmower Man, which strangely, out of the blue, with Brett Leonard, has come full circle to the VR work, because I was wearing Scott Fisher's kind of NASA VR headset in 1990, I guess, is when we did that, without having any idea where that was going to go. And then Alex Proyas and The Crow, and then Fincher and Fight Club, and then it sort of turned into all movies.
So while you were doing your Iggy Pop video, so MTV launched, and I was a child, and I was really, really enamored with music videos. I loved music videos. My parents wouldn't let us have cable television because they didn't want us to watch any more television than we were already watching. They felt that it rotted our brain. So at a very young age, I climbed the telephone pole at my street, and I spliced the cable line and fed it to my house, and fed it down the house and into the basement where my brother and I had a television set. So I would watch. My mom would come down and she'd look at it, and it didn't look like anything other than a normal television set, but we had cable on it. She had never realized it. And then when we'd go on vacation, so they'd take us up to New Hampshire, and we also didn't have cable up there. So like summer vacations and stuff were spent up there. And my brother and I used to break into condominiums that were empty and watch their MTV. So
MTV making a criminal of you.
Yeah.
Good, yeah.
So I would make little music videos with my brother, and my grandfather had a camcorder, and we would make Michael Jackson Thriller, and I used to do it with a boombox, and we didn't have any editing software or anything. There wasn't really any software in the house. I would play the boombox and play like the first verse, and then we'd act out that scene from Thriller, or whatever scene from Thriller, which involved lots of zombies, and cover my brother and his friends in mud and whatever stuff I get from the kitchen. And then it'd get to the end of the verse, and I would pause both the camera and the boombox together, and then we'd set up a new scene, and then you'd unpause them both at the same time, and then when you watched it after, you'd have the linear music video with the audio that matched it. But what's funny is the thing that really got to me was the Cure music videos. That was later on, and I was in high school, and I was deciding what I wanted to do for a career and where I wanted to go to college, and decided I'm gonna try to make music videos. And I was obsessed with the Cure, and I would watch. I had the Head on the Door VHS. So which Cure videos did you do?
I did that. So Tim Pope was the
Yeah.
amazing director who did, I
amazing.
think, about all of their videos.
Yeah.
And I think I did half a dozen of them with him, right at the early stages. It was I mean, I still, I think that music videos are kind of like science fiction. They rewire your brain if you've worked on them, because I think you have an expectation, particularly at that time, that you were kind of fully in control. I mean, Robert Smith would just call up and say, I want to make a music video about claustrophobia. And then Tim and I would sit in his basement and write that, and then we'd shoot.
Lullaby, or Close to Me.
Yes, right, in the wardrobe.
Yeah. Oh.
That was Head on the Door, wasn't it?
No, that's
Oh, I can't.
Oh shit! What is that?
Anyway, that one, where they were all in a wardrobe, and we built the smallest set ever
Someone
made.
Google that, please.
That was 10% larger than a real wardrobe, just
Yeah.
big enough to get the band in
That's
there.
a classic.
But no record company presence whatsoever, no client presence. It was just the expectation that whatever idea we wanted to do, we would just do. There was no real vetting process beyond the band liking it.
Yeah. It is Close to Me. I've got it.
It is, okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, that makes sense. And Tim, and I think that, I'm really, to leap to now, I'm really looking for the music video of new media, really, of mixed reality. How do you get into that rapidity? Because we were doing 2 or 3 videos a week sometimes at one point, and you'd write it on Monday, shoot it on Wednesday, release it on Friday, out on Term TV on Saturday, and then you'd get work on Monday if it was a hit over the weekend. Wow. That kind of dynamic has, it created people like yourself. I mean, it created directors that it's very different than any other kind of medium, I think.
Yeah, it was always. A lot of people that I went to film school with all wanted to make feature films, and I wanted to make music videos, and it was something from even early on. Like whenever I heard there's like synesthesia where you see color when you hear music. Mm-hmm. I just saw like I saw like scenes when I heard music, and that's what being a music video director is. You're basically scoring picture and story to music score. You're doing like the reverse that a film composer does. So my trajectory was I went to college and I was a double music film major because one side of me wanted to be a musician and the other wanted to be a filmmaker or a music video director, and I ended up in art school in San Francisco, and I just got more into the music video side than the making music side, and I thought in my head that, well, this could be more powerful than making music. Like if I'm putting music and moving picture together, that's going to be more powerful than either alone. And I went full force into becoming a music video director, and somewhere in the process I realized that I was incorrect. That wasn't actually that it wasn't more powerful than just the song alone, and because music is a different kind of medium than film and literature and radio and theater. Music is experiential, and it works in a deeper place. Like it connects to a deeper part of your brain, and it connects to memory in a really profound way. Which is why when you hear that one song from the one summer with the one girl, you're just like instantly transported back there again. And that doesn't happen when you watch a movie from that summer or you read a book from that summer. So I realized what I was doing as a music video director was just sort of prescribing the visions in my head to this song, and it sort of felt like almost like a little bit of a disservice, because it felt like a really powerful song can never be as powerful as the music video for that song. And in a way, like I was taking something away from people that like the most powerful music video is The Summer with the One Girl. Like that's the most powerful music video, not the
one that you associate,
not the one that I made up in my head.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is through a long route, that's essentially what I'm trying to craft in VR. Like that medium of that one summer with that one girl, that lived story is the thing that is what virtual reality is in its very raw, low resolution form right now. Can I craft that human experience rather than feed someone, a rectangle full of media? So I became a music video director. I was frustrated with the form. I also felt like there was there was something, maybe I could add something to music videos to make them more than they were, or that I had grown up with. So it was right around this time that music videos stopped being played on MTV because they were playing reality television, and they moved to the web. But the thing was that everyone was making them as if they were making them for television. Then they were just being broadcast on YouTube. And I looked at the medium of the web, and it's clearly a different medium than a television set. Like television is a one-way feed of information, and the internet is a potentially two-way conversation. And you also have access to everything else that's on the internet that you could incorporate as well. So the first project that I did was called the Johnny Cash Project, and it was one of the very early crowdsourcing projects where people around the world interfaced with this website that we built. It still works, actually. It's called thejohnnycashproject.com. And I cut a linear video of archival footage. This is post Johnny's passing, so this was like his last music video. And you could go to the site and then draw one of the frames yourself. We built a black and white drawing tool. So the video, as it evolved, became it's only drawings that people have submitted of all the different frames. So it's hundreds of thousands of frames from people around the world. And it became like this moving, growing, expanding, living portrait of Johnny from the people that cared about him the most. And so that was interesting, and it was, it was totally different than a traditional music video. This was something that didn't exist until people, when it first launched, it was black space. And slowly you saw these as people started submitting frames, you see these little flickers of Johnny, like this ghost coming from the machine. And it was meaningful to the people that participated in a way that was not possible just watching a music video on a television set. So that was exciting, but it wasn't by any means like a scalable thing. Like once you do it once, you're not like, it was an interesting idea, but you're not going to do it again. And then the second thing I did was called The Wilderness Downtown with Arcade Fire. Yeah. And that was a piece that we were incorporating HTML5, which was brand new at the time. Google Chrome and Safari had just enabled it. So it was a new kind of tool that just like showed up in your computer with a with an update. And with that, we asked you to put your address in that you grew up in as a child, or the home address of the home that you grew up in, and we then used the data sets that are available on the internet and pulled in Google Street View and Google Maps footage and Google Earth footage and built this film of this teenager running down a street, and you realize as he gets farther that he's running down your childhood street, and he stops in front of a home, and it's your home, and there's a lot of other things that it does and that it says, but it was basically an experiment in personalization. Like, can I take this song that has no memory for you because it's the new song and build a memory that is personalized to you? And that also that was exciting and new and cool, but it was not something that was repeatable. It was a parlor trick. So I'm still dealing with this frame of the computer, which was really frustrating, and just all the hardware and everything that came along with it, and people not having their drivers updated or their mouses plugged in, and I was trying to figure out, how do I get away from the computer? How do I do something more? And what I figured was, if I build more installation pieces, in this case they were in museums, I could surround you with the work, where I couldn't do that. And this is where I started experimenting with immersion as the tool. And what I saw was, when people felt immersed in a room that they went in where they're surrounded by something, that their emotional level of engagement just shot through the roof. They lost themselves. They stopped thinking about it as this thing on a screen that they were witnessing, and started just experiencing it as a moment in time that they were living within. So that was really exciting. The problem was that none of those experiences, it felt repeatable but not scalable. Because you had to build a room, and you can only build so many rooms, and you can only fit 6 people in it at a time. And ultimately, like, I want something that gets broadcast out into the world, and that 8-year-olds are breaking into condominiums to like experience in New Hampshire, and I can't do that if it's just a room in the MoMA. So I realized that virtual reality was the obvious scalable version of an immersive media experience, and started asking around and researching. And I also saw, it's interesting, Apple had filed a bunch of patents around an iPhone in glasses. So that was like the signal of, okay, this is, like, the technology is here, that you have microprocessors, inexpensive directional sensors, high resolution screens. Maybe I was saying to my co-founder at the time, maybe we try to build like a VR headset with phones. And then I got introduced to Mark Bolas and Noni De La Pena, and I went over to the lab in USC and saw what they were doing, and they obviously were way ahead. And I didn't know anything about hardware whatsoever, but when I tried Noni's piece, it all clicked, and it was like, okay, this is definitely the thing. But it needed the thing inside the thing. It needed, like, this is the television set, so what's the television show? And that's when I started this journey of trying to figure out we don't even have a word for it. I hate the word content. Experience sounds weird. Media, it feels like the last generation. But like, what is this thing inside of this new hardware that is going to be meaningful to human beings and emotional, and hopefully connect them together? So that's when I started on a journey of virtual reality, and that was probably like 4 or 5 years ago.
Which was probably because I think Noni's work, the Hunger Project, was that the name of it, was my first contact with VR as well. But I think it took me much longer to get to that point of the feeling, the need to actually get inside the system. I think I got very interested in the power of systems as design tools with Minority Report. When we started that film and there was no script, and we realized that we actually had to build a methodology to develop a framework within which narrative would evolve. On reflection, what we were really doing was creating a spherical world space that was enabling the filmmakers to choose where they wanted to place the narrative. But the sphere was kind of intact, like the world was intact. They could have gone in 100 different routes through that spherical world space. And that just came out of the necessity to actually frame a story that didn't yet exist, to kind of build context and then know that there was a certain number of triggers that were going to frame it. There was context, there was, where were we, when were we, and there was precogs as a trigger. But really, I think what my arc from that point on to the point of really getting quite frustrated with being a production designer, where I had limited control over the system and limited ability to get back to that space where the evolution of story was in lockstep with the evolution of world. That, I continued to play out for the next probably 10 years after Minority Report was 2000. So 2012, I stepped into USC to co-teach a class with Scott Fisher, kind of remaking that connection with him from Lawnmower Man. And it was a game class, and I was suddenly exposed to game engine and all sorts of different technology and the kind of concept of real time, and really starting to think deeply about how you could bring back or start, kind of introducing the technology that game had laid out had been working with for a long time to become a set of tools that would first allow you to develop the world, and then that world was a system within which stories could evolve. And I think sort of concurrent with that, when I was asked to teach full-time at USC, it was in lockstep with Intel coming in saying, we're seeing this kind of VR, AR stuff going on. How would you build a research project around that where you could really kind of investigate? For them, it was like, how could you challenge the chip? How complicated is this world going to get, and how much attention are we going to have to pay to the chips we build to be able to support it? But again, my focus is really about design first. Like how do you create the environments that trigger the narratives? But I find myself increasingly interested in the idea that if we build new tools that allow new kinds of collaboration, the stories kind of emerge almost as a byproduct of that they're triggered by the world space.
You're doing multi-person experiences.
Yes, I think right away with the Intel project, which became known as Leviathan, and it was just that they had the property of Scott Westerfeld's book, which imagined a flying whale, a giant flying whale in 1895 on a voyage from London to Moscow. That was and it was around World War I originally, the young adult novel. But it was imagining Darwin's theories turned into fabricated creatures. It was really just a great opportunity for closed world space that was the whale in isolation from any land, terrain, architecture, with a little laboratory on board, and then what stories could occur inside. So I've only ever really engaged in creating CG environments with game engines associated with them. But right away it was like, well, there's 15 different stories going on at the same time in here. And and how do you even start controlling those kind of narratives? The degree of complexity, as soon as, you know, more than 3 people are going through that world space at one time, and then adding to that the idea that is most interesting to me about VR, which is that the audience's becomes the audience's decision, the user's decision or the participant's decision becomes absolutely part of the storytelling, which I think is exactly, you know, what you first triggered with the Arcade Fire piece was the first piece I saw of yours, where the story changes every time you go in, but a kind of sleep no more idea that wherever you choose to stand on the stage, the story is infinite. It has infinite numbers of possibilities because the way you stack up that environment and choose to engage in the narratives, even if there are multiple linear narratives that are preset, their relationship one to the other is always radically different depending on where you decide to view it from.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was trying to figure out when I was first moving into VR, there was essentially 2 tool sets to work with. There's camera capture. I mean,
Yeah.
we built some of the very early cameras, but like you could either use a camera or a bunch of cameras to capture a 360 environment, or you could build it in CG. And I looked at it and thought, okay, I want to tell stories about human beings, and is it better to, because if you're capturing something with a camera, you're limited to the degrees of freedom that the viewer will have. You're also limited in the interactivity, but at the time there wasn't much interactivity anyway. It was about things that you could sit in one place or stand in one place and look at that were captured with a camera, because the camera doesn't, I mean, you can only be where the camera was. Right. So you can't walk around the scene, or you could render it in real time, but then obviously you're not going to get a photorealistic human being. So I was thinking, you know, we were doing some of the early stuff we did a documentary called Clouds Over Sidra, where we went to a refugee camp in Jordan and told the story of this young 12-year-old girl that had been there for a year and a half. And it just seems so obvious that the version where you can see her and her family, and when she looks at the camera, it feels like you're making eye contact with her, that was the more powerful connecting experience than if I could walk around her, but she was, you know, in the rendered form. So the first thing that we did was really start trying to explore what was a form of filmmaking in virtual reality, and there was a language that we didn't know. There was there were new editorial conventions that we figured out, but it was. In retrospect, it is definitely taking film and transposing it to virtual reality, which is the natural thing that every new medium makes the mistake of doing, which is just take the old one and try to shoehorn it into the new one. Yeah. That's what I've been doing for a while, and it taught us a lot of lessons, and it made for really compelling experiences, and lots of people enjoyed them, and that's great. But I don't think it's the final form of the medium in any way.
I was curious because I only realized recently that you shot that at Atari, and we, so coming from a completely different angle, and Gabo was part of this in Berlin. We did a workshop at the Berlin Film Festival with Kilian Kleinschmidt, who was, I think, sort of driving Zatari, or was the interface from the UN to Zatari. But the challenge there was, how do you reimagine the refugee camp and move it forward? And I think the balance has always been, as you say, is like, do you capture the moment, sort of put your head into the world, and the power of that emotionally, that makes absolute, sense in terms of your engagement with the human narrative. But the issue for me was, his challenge to us around Satari is what would you do differently? How would you change the relationship of community to the creation of a city from the ground up that was no longer a refugee camp, but actually a city of the future? And I don't have the solution to that, but his challenge was to do with collaboration and kind of development with a future lens, So, and I think I'm really curious as much as anything about where you are with the inceptive process, because I feel that my most compelling experiences with VR have been at extremely low resolution as planning tools, as a way to go into a space that you thought of that morning, and by the next morning you could stand inside it. So that kind of transference of something that, as a creator, you don't need it at high resolution at that point. It's really just sort of representing the thing you thought of. But it's allowing all of the creator participants to gather around it and push and pull at it. So there's a piece of that which is like, how do we actually use this incredibly powerful tool to change the way we create, even if the outcome is actually linear narrative? Sort of turn it on its head and say, filmmaking will be more effective if you were actually able to collaborate inside the brain in the actual raw process of imagination. And then the other piece of it is how do you bring very different, very diverse experts around really complex systems problems and allow them to engage with each other with a new kind of medium. Again, not as an outcome, but as a kind of process.
Yeah. I know and understand the process that you're talking about. I haven't personally used it in that way. The tools I'm actually approaching it from a different angle. I mean, what you're talking about, using virtual reality to set up low resolution scenes and figure out the like pre-production for film, basically. I think it's really cool. I haven't used it at all. I've sort of kind of lost interest in making cinema. In fact, I had a movie that was greenlit at Annapurna, and it had stars attached, and I stepped off of it because I wanted to fully concentrate on this. It to me, it was more interesting because it's so undefined. But in terms of the working in things that are representational rather than photorealistic, did have a really interesting discoveries around that, but from a totally different angle. So I was frustrated again with the solitude of the films that we were making. You go into them and you're essentially an invisible ghost, and you're in the refugee camp and you're looking around and you hear voiceover, but it crosses one big barrier in that these things that go in here are like abstracted human experience represented in rectangular frames, right? It's a story about other people in another place at another time, and a very skilled filmmaker shows you exactly what he wants you to see and the angle he wants you to see it and exactly the way he wants you to see it, or she. And when you get into making the video VR, it crossed the barrier in that it is now a story about us here right now. So that was exciting. It became like the abstraction of the filmmaking of let's do a close-up shot, and now let's cut to a wide shot, and then let's cut to an over-shoulder shot. That language gets stripped out, and it becomes just you're at the actual time and place that this thing that a traditional filmmaker would capture and broadcast back at you. The problem was now, okay, great, you're here, it's really happening, but you're a silent, invisible ghost. And what the humanity that I was getting from the photorealism I wanted more. I wanted to feel other people inside of this. I mean, ultimately, I'm trying to use new technologies to make stories, but also to connect people together in stronger, more profound ways, because that's what film and music videos and everything did for me. And the first test that we did was my co-founder Aaron Koblin was in the office up in San Francisco, and I was down in Los Angeles, and we had basically just like a room in virtual reality, just white walls, a floor, and we had a box for my head and two boxes for my hands, and the same for him. And I went into my headset in Los Angeles and got into this virtual room, and he wasn't there yet, so his three boxes were on the ground. And then he obviously walked into his room. Suddenly the big box like went up in the air and landed in space, stopped there, and then the two hands came up, and these three boxes basically floating in space walked over to me and immediately recognized it as Aaron. And then his voice came out of it and said, "Hey dude, what's up?" And my brain just clicked. And it wasn't an abstraction. It was, these boxes are Aaron, and somehow like his soul is in it, and I'm immersed in this world. There's a three-dimensional object in front of me. It's weird, but like the person that I know, his soul is residing within these boxes, and it just clicked that it didn't matter what the resolution was.
Yeah.
If you get another human inside of it, the whole thing just comes alive in a way that's not possible. So then we took that as a great starting point, and we tried to build something that we said, let's try to build something. This is what we were showing at Sundance last year, called Life of Us, and it was, let's put you into different creatures. Let's change your voice. Let's like really push this thing to the limit and see how different we can make you. So Life of Us is the story of evolution from amoeba forward to now post singularity and beyond. So you start as amoebas together, and then you have amoeba voices, and you're floating through this primordial soup, and then you go through this fog, and then you come out as tadpoles on the other side, and then you have tadpole voices. And it's so crazy because it doesn't matter that it doesn't look anything like your friend, and it doesn't even sound like your friend. As soon as you recognize, oh, that's my friend, that's saying hi to me in a way that it says hi to me, even though he's a tadpole voice, your brain will just accept it. So what you were talking about, the low resolution, it doesn't matter. Your brain just accepts it and fills it in, and it also, it feels like this is the raw form of the true vision of the medium. It's like a shared dream, essentially. Like you and I both end up in the shared dream, except it's authored, and it's not our subconscious driving it. There's an author that has crafted this for you both to experience together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the real time is the key, isn't it? I think it's like not only. I mean, I'm also very interested now with kind of the AR possibilities. Is that if you can make these incredible translations. The audience is the sophistication of the audience is very capable of understanding that an object, like when we flew the whale off the screen at CES, it wasn't really there in the world space. They saw it composited on the screen with themselves. They waved their hands. They understood they were there. It was there. It was real time, multiple cameras, all with a live video feed in the composite. And they were having a real engagement with an AR object that was an 80-foot whale that wasn't actually there. So I think it's that. But the other key, I think, to what you were saying is that sound is at full resolution from the beginning, and that you engage, your mind fills in a huge amount when the sound, the music, the whole sound design of the space is complete.
You talked about world building. I'm interested in your opinion. the storytelling in virtual reality versus augmented reality. Um, in virtual reality, you are world building. You're building everything that you see around you in 360 degrees, and you're existing within it, and you're living through it. Um, Whereas was AR, the world is the one that you're currently residing in, and you're adding character and other things to it. Do you find that really limiting?
I think they're just very different. When I first put on HoloLens, it was interesting because part of their demo was going from full immersion to partial. I think it was maybe the Mars rover experience, like, and you'd see your own computer, and then you'd look over here, and then there was Mars, and then you'd step towards it, and you were actually kind of in Mars. I mean, it's all, limited by your field of view, but on one level, I think there's a clear direction there where you're going to be able to move back and forth, I think. What I'm interested in, I mean, this is really like last week was the first demo we did of this. We're building a project right now with a group called The Bridge, which is a group focused on cellular biology. And we're doing a project called The World in a Single Cell, where we've been mapping this whole year a pancreatic beta cell as if it were a city. You're sort of using the metaphor of city to create a new visual language that will allow people to immerse themselves inside a cell to be a viewer of complex system, not necessarily be able to change the cell at the beginning, but to be able to bring scientists who would never have been able to enter that space together because the language is so esoteric and it's so kind of opaque. But what we did last week was that we put into Mirror, into the dev kit of the new AR system where you put your phone into the AR and project it down into the screen. We took individual kind of origami components out of the cell that was an immersive 360 spherical world space, and then took them out and placed them in our own world space. And I think there's something interesting about the difference between examining that object and getting to know it intimately in relation to your world space and be able to walk around it and kind of scale it and tap on it and go inside it, where you're outside it, it's an object. And then simultaneously almost, or just move over to VR and see it as a participant in a spherical world space and understand it more intimately because you've had that AR experience with it. So I think there's a piece of something interesting that I think to me is the future, is where they become kind of blended.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm personally struggling. I have a few ideas, but it's not as easily translatable. I mean, if we had AI photorealistic humans in AR that could totally build a story in real time in whatever environment you are in, that's a different story than capturing, a volumetric capture of an actor that's performing like a play in your living room that you're not interacting with. I think like it will be an incredibly functional tool in our day-to-day lives, augmented reality I'm talking about. And I think there are certain applications of storytelling that will be meaningful. But I think that virtual reality is the one that is the full experience if you're talking about living a story. And I guess it's like that's where I think we're crossing a really interesting line now, that essentially the stories that we have been the stories that we've experienced as media, be it from Christopher Nolan's new IMAX movie all the way back to a guy around a fire telling us a story in a cave, they're all there's an author to the story. There is a transmission of information about the story that you witness and internalize and connect to, and it's a story that you are told, but then you leave the the IMAX theater and you walk out the door and you go into your life and you live the stories of your life. And our reach as artists has not extended past that theater door. Once you walk out the door, that's as far as our domain um, borders go. So, but the stories of your life are actually the more compelling stories. Like if you think back to what are the most meaningful stories that you've experienced, it's moments that happen to you in your life. It's not the movies that you watched. I mean, the movies that you watch are compelling experiences, but the ones that are your stories are always going to be more meaningful. So I think what we're talking about is a medium that is one of authored stories that are lived rather than witnessed. They're not told stories, they're lived stories. Now, that introduces an incredibly complex set of problems as to how do you tell those stories, how do you author those stories, and where, it's not like Muybridge finished his camera system and handed it to Orson Welles and he made a movie with it. Like there's a long process of experimentation and discovery, and I think we're definitely in that moment, entering in that moment. But it is. I'm curious. Like I've been saying for a while, it's not like I'm not even sure you call what we are directors for virtual reality, because a director is someone that is crafting that abstraction of human experience. And I've said for a while, like you're more of a world builder. And then I learned about your lab and your research. So I want to hear more about world building and how you think about that and how that's progressed from the first idea to now.
Well, I think that point about authorship is really fascinating to me, because I think that world building, if I would sort of, I've been showing this slide of kind of potted history of narrative of Western storytelling, and the idea that story evolved to make sense of the world around us, and it was a participatory medium. Maybe there were assigned storytellers, but there were many of them, and those stories were passed down through generations, and they were modified and tuned, and more people. So the big mythologies are like, thousands and thousands of participants. So in many ways, there's a version of what you're saying where each of those participants is putting their own life inside that story space. And those huge evolving stories are, at the very least, multi-authored. And the notion of a single director directing the viewer's gaze doesn't really kick in until, my potted history, the printing press at 1440, where the writer, the photographer, the artist, everybody is now in control of that viewer's gaze and creates some version of a proscenium that is telling you, you look at this and I'm going to tell you a good story. And one of the things that to me, the disruptor was seeing VR and understanding that the notion of director really was complex in that world space. And so I'm still in the very early stages of going back to that idea of like Zatari, where you could gather around the future of the creation of a world and put 10, 100, 1,000 people into that space and have them all add their personal stories into that, and that as a platform for making sense of the world around us, that's being informed by as many people as it takes to tell the complexity of story that involves an entire city in the future, or a cell, or a flying whale with many stories. I think it's really an interesting time to say we are at the very beginning of this medium, and it doesn't necessarily. I think theatre is a more direct analog to the way that the creation process works in VR. I think that you still need the singular visions, many single visions in that space. But I think that's what is the potential of getting back to a kind of tribal storytelling, global storytelling, accumulating narrative world spaces that build out of worlds and then continue to evolve, become more and more complex. It's what is kind of great now is that the computation that is there to probably be able to handle the complexity of those kind of stories, at least at this early stage. And if we push that way and we say everybody, every creator in this room could be adding to this kind of global narrative, I think that's really exciting to me, because then it's kind of 1 + 1 = 3. It is out of any one of our individual control, and there's something that really interesting about how that reflects the reality of the evolution into the future of where story goes.
But are you talking about a story evolving by way of people coming in and changing it, or you're talking about thousands of people in a world that you've built living their own individual stories and interacting with each other, like finding their stories through the world that's built, or you're talking about an authored story that people are each experiencing and somehow changing as new people come in and experience it?
I think at the moment I'm talking in the terms that we're engaging it. I think I'm talking about multiple creators gathering around and creating a complex system that is never inert, that's never finished, where those stories kind of evolve, and each time a new kind of collision of two narratives, kind of intersect, then a third narrative springs off, and I have no idea how to do it. I'm not remotely technical in any of these things, but I think the challenge that we're putting out there is like the future of the way in which we create a tool also, I think, becomes the future of that experience.
There's the people that made Second Life now have a company called High Fidelity, and they have a thing called Sanzar, where you can go in and actually create environments that you can live within. And there's a few other there's a few other companies like Altspace VR, which just got purchased by Microsoft, is doing extensive worlds that people can, like persistent extensive worlds that people can wander around and build in. And so yeah, it's already starting to happen.
And I think you can take Tilt Brush, for example, as I love seeing these kind of triggers. As soon as I went in and played with Tilt Brush, I thought there's no limit now to what we can just make with if you can just kind of dimensionalize, you give volume to a pure idea like a brushstroke or a pencil stroke, then that sort of becomes instantly the future of architectural development. So yeah, I think what's that system called, the Second Life one? Sansar?
Sansar, I think.
Yeah, I went into that a couple of weeks back, and it's interesting, but it's kind of like Unity, I guess, like a lot of the Vive space, with lots of stuff off the shelf. But I think the idea that you could go in and manipulate any of those pieces and make unique vision.
Yeah, I mean, if you just you can learn Unity and start building right away. You don't even need a commercial solution like the ones that we mentioned.
Yeah.